Calling all skilled mechanics. Kimball Recycling and Disposal is growing and needs experienced mechanics to keep their fleet in top shape and on the road. Kimball is offering up to a $5,000 sign-on bonus. That's right, up to $5,000 just for joining their winning team. At Kimball, they value your experience and offer a great work environment where you can thrive. Put your mechanic skills to use and join their winning team today. Apply now at kimballcompanies.com. Kimball, recycling and disposal done right.
Welcome to Talkin Trash, where we try to answer all of your questions about recycling and proper waste disposal in Tuscarawas County. I'm your host, Hannah Hartman, and joining me is my go-to expert on all things recycling here in Tuscarawas County, my sister, Rachel Gerstacker. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Rachel is a passionate advocate for recycling and sustainable practices, and she has worked in our local recycling industry for several years. So her behind-the-scenes knowledge about how to recycle properly in Tuscarawas County is vast, and that is what is going to guide our ongoing discussions here on the Talkin Trash podcast. This episode is being recorded on August 13th, 2024, and because rules and regulations change over time, some of what we discuss may have changed by the time you hear this, but with that caveat, let's dumpster dive into this discussion, right, Rachel? Okay. So very quickly, why don't we go over the basics, just as a starting point. We're not going to get too into it because we really did go item by item over the last several episodes, so if you missed them, go back and watch and listen to them. But what are the basics of recycling?
The basics are the high five, the 5 categories, which are paper and cardboard, metal cans, glass bottles and jars, and plastic bottles and jugs.
Okay. For a deeper discussion on any of those things, check out our earlier episodes.
Yes.
But we kind of wanted to start this episode with a little bit of listener feedback. So we do have some fans out there, Rachel, listening to our Talkin Trash.
Yeah, our family.
It's always our family to start. So, Dad, our dad has some feedback. So he was talking about grocery bags at the store.
Yes, he brought it up because in a prior episode I was saying that the best solution is to bring reusable bags every single time. Right? He was making the point, maybe you don't remember, the next best thing would be requesting paper bags instead of plastic bags, which I do agree with him on that logic. And most of the stores, like some stores I know you do pay either more or you pay some for paper, but a lot of them still have a paper option. So that is a good one to consider.
It is, I honestly kind of forgot that was still an option because it's not really like out in front of your face. And he was making the point that you often do have to request that because it's not right there out obvious, right?
Yeah, it depends on what store you go to, but we go to Aldi a lot, and they are in front of you at Aldi, but you do scan them and pay for them at Aldi. That's the incentive. That's why I like Aldi, because they do incentivize you.
It's true.
To bring your car back or to get your,
I definitely use my reusable bags when I go there, but so just if you're at a store and the go-to option is the plastic grocery bag and you're thinking, I think maybe there's a more sustainable solution to this, you can always ask and request a paper bag. Just kind of depends on the store.
Yes.
Yeah, so good feedback, Dad. All right. So why don't we start with, but move on to our next segment, which is the Where Should It Go segment. We kind of tweak the names of each segment as the episodes go on, so now we're calling it Where Should It Go? Yes. And, like I said, we've already talked about the 5 basics: paper, cardboard, metal, glass, and plastic. But when we were talking about plastic in our previous episode, we were focusing on bottles and jugs.
Yes.
So this time we want to talk about things that aren't bottles and jugs, that are plastic, and where they should go.
Yes. So we have, it kind of breaks into different categories. It's like subgroups of plastics in general.
Sure.
So before we were saying the main thing you want in your curbside bins or at the public drop-offs is bottles and jugs, because that's the most desirable kind of plastics. Those are the ones that often don't have contamination, like food residue still inside of them because they're pop and you drank it all or you could go out. Hopefully you clean them out. But the subcategories of ones that are not bottles and jugs, I kind of think of the term tubs is one. So if you think about like yogurt tubs or cottage cheese tubs or butter tubs, the thing about these is they don't have the neck and shoulders, which I know we've talked about in other episodes. However, I still always do a case-by-case basis a little bit, which I know is not fun for everyone who's trying to just have these quick ways to remember them. But think about the other rule of thumb I've mentioned in prior episodes if you've been listening is, can you get it at a grocery store?
Right.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Now there is a lesser market for the numbers 3 through 7 of plastics compared to the 1 and the 2, but it doesn't mean there's no market. So the things I always consider are, well, one, is it clean? Is it impossible to get the food residue out of it or not? If you can't really clean it and you don't want to go to that effort, then do not throw the dirty thing in the bin. Now, consider the size of the thing. Is it kind of similar to a size of like a number 1 and 2 plastic, a bottle or a jug? Do you think it's big enough to get through the process to the end, or is it going to fall through grates? Is it smaller than that credit card size? That's another thing I mentioned before. So it's kind of keeping all of these things in mind. Now, another type, so I would say depending on the tub, cottage cheese or yogurt, I still have been throwing them in there as long as they are clean. They're not the single serve ones. Those ones probably won't make it through. But if it's a bigger one, I would. I kind of take the chance. Now, a totally different, but still a type of plastic is a rigid plastic. So when we say that, we're talking more about very substantial things. Kiddie pools, lawn furniture that's broken, or a laundry hamper, a bucket with a handle on it, a flower pot. These are all what we would call rigid plastics, and these won't stand a chance at the MRF. So, whereas
don't put them in your curbside bin.
Now, if they are not broken and they could still be donated or something, or repurposed into something else, I've seen people use kiddie pools with a crack in them as more like a raised flower bed or something. Like, you could be creative, but we do not want those in curbside bins, and they won't fit very well, to be honest. So that should be a key to you, and we don't want them in public drop-offs.
Well, and kind of just to jump in, I know we got a few other things we want to talk about, but you're kind of painting a picture in my head of like the sweet spot when it comes to the size of items. If it's too small, it's not going to make it through the process. If it's too big, it's going to jam up the machine.
Yes, exactly.
So it's trying to find those items that are likely to make it through the process based on size.
Yes, and in the case of like a bucket, this also, like, it might have a metal handle, and we don't want the mixed material. So think about that. The flower pots are kind of interesting because if you have ones that aren't too damaged, some of the local nurseries or like the Lowe's, places that have greenhouses, will sometimes take them back. So it's always about being creative and trying to think. Ultimately, some of the things will get trashed, but some of them you might be able to give another life, or another life cycle to. Now, another type of plastic, so we have like the tubs and the rigids, and I think of the films as another kind of subcategory. And we've talked about that a little bit in prior episodes as well, but this would include things like your grocery bags, obviously, or bread bags, or mailers, like if you get something in the mail that's wrapped in plastic, or some things are still delivered in plastic envelopes, stretch film. The one I had on the list that I was looking it up right before we got here was the salt bag. So if you have water softener and you put softener salt in it, in my mind, so the rule of thumb with the plastic films, which should not go in your curbside bin or at the public drop-off, but some stores do take them back and claim to recycle them. There is some doubt about what happens, but I always say, why would they do it if they weren't? Why would they take it?
Seems like a lot of effort
throw it away? Unless it's just greenwashing, or we've talked about that too. But regardless, the rule of thumb with the plastic films is like, is it kind of a stretchable plastic? If you try to stretch it, does it do it, or is it more like a kind that tears? And if it's a kind of stretchable kind, generally it's like the numbers 2s and 4s are the ones that will be accepted at those store drop-off locations. So I was looking at a salt bag at home, and it did have number 4, and it did say store drop-off. Now it did have a hard plastic handle on it, and I'm assuming I would need to get rid of that.
Off or something.
Yeah, because that's just a totally different kind of plastic that would be handled the same way. So you always have to think about if it's mixed with other things, or if it's truly plastic, or in the case of bread bags or something, does it have a bunch of gross, yeasty remains? They don't want that. But the only other thing I was going to comment on the plastics, and it's because it's an update since the last time we had our podcast, is about bottle caps. Now, there's multiple things to consider. We were previously saying put a bottle cap back on the bottle before you recycle the bottle, and it's because the processors were saying we like the bottle to maintain its same shape, because that's what the equipment is designed to sort through, more than something crushed and all mangled. So, that makes sense. However, since then, we have learned by talking with some of the drivers, the recycling truck drivers who actually empty these things and try to compact it, is that for that very reason, it makes it very inefficient to transport loads of these plastics, because they try to compact it and they just bounce right back up, and then you can't fit as much. So it's almost a like pick your poison kind of thing, where it's like, well, do we want to burn a bunch more fuel transporting them so that they make it through the MRF better, or do we want to get them to the MRF so they have a better shot of being recycled? The thing I will comment on is plastic bottles or plastic caps off of the bottle won't make it through the MRF process. So you don't want to throw bottle caps without being attached to a bottle. However, there are some programs, and I'm sure people have seen them around. It's the Bottle Caps to Benches program, where school groups can work with a local processor here up in like Akron, Ohio, if they collect enough pounds of just caps, because their equipment is designed for the cap size. I even asked them, well, can I throw my cottage cheese containers and other things that, and they're like, no, our equipment can't handle that big. They can only handle these lids and caps.
It is amazing to me how much of this just comes down to size.
And the equipment.
And again, we're really specific to Tuscarawas County. What you're talking about is in a different county. So like, that's the whole goal of this podcast, is to try to help you better understand what we're doing here. Some people who are very avid recyclers might want to take that extra step and even potentially travel to another county to make something, just to keep something out of the landfill, which, is amazing, but
admirable and not achievable for all of us.
So just to kind of go over that list one more time and reiterate. So this is the segment called Where Should It Go? So tubs like yogurt containers that don't have neck and shoulders, they should go. Really, they could go in your curbside bin,
depending on the size. If it's clean.
But if it's not clean, or it's too big or too small, just trash.
And where it came from. If it came from a grocery store, usually that's a good rule.
So rigid plastics
never go.
Don't go in your curbside. Let me ask you a quick question about rigid plastics. Maybe somebody's thinking, I have this kiddie pool, but it's like broken. So maybe it's small enough because it's broken.
I would still argue it's a different type of plastic, a different shape than what they're looking for. It's usually probably going to do more harm than good. And I love that, again, it's admirable that someone would fight. I'm the same way.
I try to think like maybe your average person might think about something. I like to think of myself as that type of person versus you who really knows this stuff. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, it's all going to get broken down and melted down. And so like, why does it matter if it's broken? But again, it kind of just comes down to that sorting machine.
What is the intended end use? Because like, I just went to another material recovery facility last week, and it was a different one from the other company I've gone to before, and I could see how they had the number one plastics in a bale of only that type of plastic, and then number two, it was either clear or colored plastic. Like, it depends how far down they're going to categorize, because they don't want any non-number one plastic in with the number one, because then it's not going to become what they're selling it to become. So if they are selling mixed plastics, then sure, by all means, depends but there's not a lot of market for mixed plastics because you can't make as much out of mixed plastics. So again, we're trying to simplify things, but it's just not that simple.
But we're doing our best here, Rachel. So why don't we go ahead and move on to our next section, common questions section of the podcast. So here's one you said is a pretty common question. Is recycling economical? We're going to all this effort. You and I are trying to clarify things with this podcast because it gets confusing, and the economics of this must be hard to calculate for one, but in the end, do you think it is economical to recycle?
It is. I will phrase it this way. Recyclable commodities have value. That is a fact. If you bring in the word economical, it makes me take into account what is the cost to get it to that point. And in that case, like, I did pull numbers of what the market values of some recyclable materials were. So for example, I thought this was the highest one. It's aluminum was $1,500 per ton for aluminum. Conversely, the lowest was actually paying, so not getting paid, paying $17.65 per ton for mixed glass. So there's a cost for transporting that's greater than what you'll get back from selling it, essentially. The other thing to keep in mind is that depending on where you take it, there'll be a processing fee. So first, think about the transportation of getting the item from the bins and wherever to the place where they're sorting it. So there's a cost to that. And then once they get it there, there's the cost of running that facility, of paying those people to do the sorting and the equipment and everything that goes with it. And then in the end, whenever they take out the contamination in any trash, there's a fee for that as well. So it's like, this example is, yes, there are values to most of the commodities aside from glass. However, once you take into account the processing fee, then it ends up you're paying to recycle. You are not being paid to recycle in that instance. But that is like, if you think about the high amount for the aluminum, it's like, think about people that used to go and collect cans and take them to a recycling facility.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they were doing the legwork of the transportation and the sorting. They had a bag of cans. It wasn't contaminated.
Well, and then let me
there was value to the cans.
Let me just kind of throw this out there. If you don't put it in a recycle bin, then you might put it in your trash can. Well, that's also going to cost something to get that to the landfill.
Pay a fee for that.
And you don't really get paid for the trash at the end. So if you're trying to think like, does it make sense for me to recycle from an economic standpoint? I would say yes.
I would say yes, because it'll have to go anyway.
If it's going one place or the other, and at the end of the recycling process you might get a few bucks out of it, then it is economical in that balance sheet.
It's kind of that pick your poison again.
We are dealing with an imperfect system overall, but we're trying our best. So
my answer is it can be, and yes, there is value to recyclable commodities.
I like that answer. All right, let's get into our dumpster diving section. So I did a little dumpster diving right before you. You helped me actually. So we're talking about plastics, right? So I happened to find kind of a stack of lids, like plastic lids, that might go on like a food storage container or something.
Either Tupperware, maybe a meat deli.
Yeah, something like that. So what's your take on something like this, Rachel?
Well, it is funny because, of course, clear as mud. My instinct initially was like, well, no, they're not a bottle. Let's think about our rules here. It's not a neck and shoulders. It's not a bottle or jug.
Right.
But again, since visiting the MRF and me seeing what was truly ending up in the end, it kind of gave me that perspective of, as long as it's not going to like egregiously contaminate it, I'm a little more inclined to be like, well, I might try it. It says it's a number 5, which we don't always go off the numbers, but a number 5 for reference would be a cottage cheese container, a yogurt container. So a type of plastic that can be recovered and is desirable, but not as desirable as the higher or the lower numbers. So because these are crystal clear, because they're not a credit card, they're a pretty good size. Like you could assume a plastic container might be this.
Sure.
I feel like they could be recycled. They're
there
not the best. I mean, the other dumpster thing I was looking at too when we were pulling these out was there was like to-go cups, fast food to-go cups. Those I would say no, because they're dirty, they break, immediately if you start doing this, it crackles. It's got to get crackled. This, I mean, you can probably hear it. It's maintaining its shape.
Yeah, and it's not dirty.
And it's
if that was covered in something gross, then we'd throw it out. But it's like somebody, I don't know why they would have thrown these out, but they did. So maybe they lost the other parts to that.
Maybe the bottoms all did.
But they're clean. So that's a curveball, Rachel. I thought you were going to say throw it in the trash.
Well, it's even on the way here, I was like, I feel like I would try.
There aren't a lot of there's not a lot of perfectly clear answers when it comes to this, but it's exactly why we're trying to do this, just to let you know the knowledge that we possess right now. And again, we talk about how rules and regulations can change, so we're just trying to do the best with where we are right now. So perhaps after all this discussion, Rachel, maybe you have a little bit of anxiety. I don't know about you, but we're going to move on to our What's the Word section, and the word this time around is eco-anxiety.
Yes, I had to look up the technical definition because I know I have eco-anxiety, but you have to look up what it means. So the first definition I could find recorded was the chronic fear of environmental doom, and that was in like 2011. The term was coined by this Glenn Albrecht. But since then, there are some other definitions that is kind of used interchangeably, but the ones I like best, I thought that environmental doom, but this one was a generalized sense of the ecological foundations of existence are in the process of collapse, which is heavy as well, and that a chronic fear of the environment, a cataclysm that comes from observing seemingly irreparable impact of climate change, which I thought was like, or seemingly, maybe that was a lot to wrap your head around, but it's like, I didn't even say it right. But it's kind of the doom
and gloom about the ecology and the environment.
And the worry for the next generation. That was kind of part of it.
Well, and I would argue that perhaps we both have a little eco-anxiety, which is what led to this podcast, right?
Yes.
Like, you have been working in the recycling industry for over a decade now, and you kind of get that behind-the-scenes look at what's happening, and whereas you might have thought things were working this way, you come to realize, not exactly, it's more like this. And again, it's imperfect, but we do have a system, and so we're trying to work with the system we have. I think you and I can both think about a perfect world. But we're just trying to work with what we have right now.
Yes.
And so,
I know you're not alone. This was recognized, one of these definitions was from the American Psychological Association.
Yeah.
So it is a recognized type of anxiety. Can be tied into more generalized anxiety.
It's a real thing, and I think more and more people are feeling it. So you know, we don't really have we're not counselors. We can't really offer great advice to deal with that, but you're not alone if you kind of feel that way.
And try not to think too big, because then you just feel like crushing weight of it. Think more local.
I don't know that any one of us. I don't think any one of us is going to solve this single-handedly. I think if there's any hope of solving this problem, it's going to take a lot of effort on behalf of all people. So we're just, again, trying to do what we can in our little corner of the world to spread that knowledge, but you're not alone if you feel that way.
Yes.
So we're right there with you. Yeah. All right, well, why don't we move into some ways to deal with that, right? So how about some simple solutions to help you recycle? I mentioned we're recording this in August, and so summer cookouts are a big thing right now. It's been really nice weather for that. So we want to talk a little bit about mindfulness around single-use plastics at cookouts and summer events. So what kind of tips and tricks do you have, Rachel?
Well, the main ones are ones we've talked about in this episode and before, but obviously if you have the choice between a single-use paper product or something that's going to biodegrade, or a single-use plastic product which is only going to break into microplastics, then I would always advocate for paper products. So I know sometimes they aren't as elegant, maybe depending on the nature of your event, again, if it's a wedding or something, but if you're willing to spend a little more, you can get very cool compostable or biodegradable plates and things like I did for my wedding.
You did that at your wedding.
Many years ago now, but so always kind of a paper versus plastic. Think about that. Always have a recycle bin right next to your trash can, and with signage, or communicate if you're having a little party.
I've literally been at parties where nobody had, then people are drinking beer or pop or whatever, and I'm thinking, where's the recycle bin? And I'll just put a little plastic. I'll start it, right? I'll hang a plastic bag and throw a can in there and hope that others follow the example.
And they usually do. I bet they usually do. Because the key is having one right by where you would otherwise throw something away. Again, not all people will catch it, but at least the majority probably will.
Some is better than that.
And if you can have this, but you'd have to go out and purchase something. They also say that if you have something where the entry point is the same size as the container you're going to go through, so like a lid on a recycling container that's bottle size, that people are more likely to follow and not contaminate. So that's something to think about. But, and then I said consider the compostable items for larger scale events like festivals or weddings or something, because most industrial composters, so think about, we've talked about composters before, and I think in our next episode we're going to go a little more into organic, so you should stay tuned for that. But most industrial sized composters can accept, they don't want the food waste unless they're licensed to handle food waste. However, they are permitted to take the compostable plates and forks and things, as long as they're truly compostable. So you might have to do a little research into your product in that case, because some of them, there are standards they have to meet. Again, we're going to go into more detail in the future, but there are standards they have to meet in order to break down. So if you know you're going to have a big event and you're going, just have a plan for the waste you're going to create. It's a smart thing to do with any big project you're going to take on, is have a plan, and then if you care about these types of things, you can plan in advance.
And perhaps in that next episode, maybe we can get some input from organizations that specifically do that type of event, not planning, but
zero waste.
Zero waste services and stuff like that. I know a guy. Maybe we can talk to him. So
the last bit of it was just kind of weighing the convenience versus the mindfulness when it comes to this stuff, because clearly it's going to be more convenient to have a single-use plastic and immediately throw it away. That is the ultimate inconvenience, but that's not helping us.
And I do want to acknowledge that it is it can feel a little counterintuitive, but sometimes the greener option is more expensive, like a compostable fork or whatever, plates. They're probably not going to be as cheap as a plastic, whatever. So, and that's just a painful fact, I wish it wasn't that way, but if you have the means to splurge on an option that would be more earth friendly, I would encourage it. But we understand, the limitations. So. Yes. But convenience versus mindfulness, good to keep in mind. So normally, Rachel, we would transition into our good news segment, but instead I don't know if it's not quite the rhyme I wanted it to be, but instead of good news, guest interviews, it's not really the same. We have a special guest here with us. Would you like to roll on in here? This is Mallory Gerstacker, and for anybody who doesn't know, all three of us are sisters. Yes. So Mallory is older sis, and Mallory, you were certainly doing a lot in terms of eco-friendliness, and you briefly had a business where it was kind of like a trash to treasure kind of thing, but you, within the last year, you moved out of the area and you're now living in Cleveland, and so you've got a view into a different communities, recycling options, programs. So I'm just we wanted to invite you because I'm curious what good things you've seen up in your new city compared to down here, and maybe something that you might miss that they don't offer up there that we have. So what's kind of some overall thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, thank you for having
Welcome
me.
to Talkin Trash.
I've listened to every episode. Great. Even though I don't live here anymore. And when you asked me to come, I thought about the things that I love about where I'm living now and the things that I miss about here. Yeah. So that's kind of how I organized my thoughts.
Sure.
What should I start with? What I miss or what I love?
Let's start with what you love.
What I'm loving about living in Rocky River, specifically in Cleveland. There are thrift stores everywhere. I am an avid thrifter, and I've been here for a few days, and I've already hit up all my favorites down here. But they are everywhere up there, and there are different types of thrift stores that meet different needs. Like construction materials. There's a whole store. I haven't been there yet, so I can't name drop them. But like kind of different types of thrifting opportunities that you can find.
Not just clothes, not just furniture.
And gosh, some of the thrift stores up there are like Walmarts. They're massive. It's kind of mind-blowing. There's also, and I haven't been to any of these either, but they're like Target overstock stores specifically. They're called like bins and things, I think, or something to that effect. So I see how things are getting sold at the normal store, but then like they trickle down into these other options, and there's just so many up there. So I do love that. One of these specific thrift stores I will name drop. It is called the Upcycle Parts Shop, and it is an art materials thrift store, and it's bigger than that. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I have donated materials there, and I'm
former art teacher.
It's a wonderful option for an art educator. It's like people, especially when I was down here with my art studio, part of what that was people could donate things to me so I could get them to the people who want them. Right. And that's exactly what this place is doing. Awesome. So I love it so much. The Upcycle Parts Shop. Cool. Another thing I love about Cleveland is that I pay $10 a month to compost my food waste. And it's not just food waste, because they're doing commercial composting, so you can put all sorts of random types of food that you might not put in your garden compost, which you can do with them, which turned out to be a godsend a few days ago when we had tornadoes and our power went out for 5 days. We had to get rid of all our food, but I really worked hard to clean out our fridge. I composted basically all of our food.
Wow.
That we had to. That's awesome. Cleaned out all the containers really well. We still had water, so I was cleaning containers. So I did the best I could, but I kind of save my compost in my freezer until I'm ready to move it along. And I have like a bag in our freezer, and then once that's full, I put it down in the deep freeze until there's like 8 of them. Then I take them all over to the bins at City Hall, dump my food waste into these bins. I have a combination lock for, and then.
But you're hitting on something that we talked about, which is sometimes it's a little inconvenient, right? So if you're not somebody who's all that into the idea of composting, you're probably not going to participate in this program because you just sort of have to go out of your way, but the option exists for those who want to do
And
it.
I do think you can pay more for them to come to your house. I think they have a whole tier for businesses, for residents. I learned about the Rust Belt Riders when I was going through my master recycling course at Start Tuscarawas, and I still consider myself like a master recycler. I take that designation very seriously. So I am a person who's willing to store things.
Yeah.
I have space to do it, and that'll come up here in a minute too. Like a lot of this it's a long haul sometimes. Like what you're doing with these materials.
Definitely.
But yes, composting is amazing. I love being able to do that.
And I'll say that makes much more sense. They have a system like that up in the city because here people have much more room, and so we push home composting a lot more. Whereas there's a lot of the people are in apartments or in big buildings. Like
have a tiny little yard. But you also, if you are a member of the Rust Belt Riders, you get discounts on it's called tilth soil, so that's the soil they create. So I've been working on my garden, and it wasn't ready for it this year. Yes, circular. I was talking about it in my notes, like circular things. And I think there's a lot of places that do that well up there.
Yeah, that's really cool.
The other thing I really like are these kind of niche groups that are doing different types of crafting or whatever, but it is recycling. Like I participated with a group called Cleveland Sews. It's a workforce sewing program that does like circular manufacturing. So the event that I helped stitch 260 tote bags for the St. Vincent food pantry. It used to be a hospital. So they had all those curtains that divided beds. So we were using that fabric, 600 pounds of fabric.
Wow.
And there were probably 100 of us. I don't know. They had all these sewing machines. You just came in, they showed you how to do it, and we made as many tote bags as possible.
Super cool.
And I loved it. And I can't wait to help with them again.
Cool.
So those are all things that I've really loved. And just in a year, that's what I've found. I have other things I've been lurking,
More to discover.
Yes, there is, and I just love it.
Well, I don't want to make you miss home too much, but what kinds of things do you miss about what we do here in terms of recycling?
Okay.
It's
a shorter list. I'm so sorry, but I felt like I had more power to believe that my recycling was getting to where it should go, because I had a curbside bin. I lived in New Philadelphia, so I could put mixed curb stuff in that big green bin. And sometimes I'd do it, but usually I'd just bag it up and take it down to the Bueller's.
But you dump your bags.
I always dumped my bags. I had bags specifically for it. Well, that fits into this because I liked my curbside bin. However, up there, they don't do it that way. We have these blue, you have to go to the store and buy blue plastic trash bags, clear blue plastic bags. That's your recycling bag. So every week you're sending out a plastic bag, which I always thought was a tangler.
They must have some people that
Rocky River specifically has like this army of little golf cart, like decked out golf carts, so they don't send trash trucks down the streets.
Wow.
They send this it's like a swarm, takes over the neighborhood. They come and grab it, and that's why I don't like I watch them throw my recycling and whatever else I had, hoping that they're taking it someplace and sorting it, but
plus they had a story in Cleveland a few years ago where because of how bad the market's gotten recycling, they were just throwing it away for a while, and people saw that and panicked because they were like, have they always been doing this? No, they're not always doing it, but during that.
But optics, like what you see happening is different there than what I could control down here. I felt like I also just knew the lay of the land here, so I knew where to get things.
Plus, you had the inside scoop from us.
That's true, but I can still text her if I need to.
That's true. Yeah.
I did want to mention, you were talking about hard plastics this episode, right? What were they called? Rigid plastics? I don't know if this fits into things I love or things I miss, but it's two things I do. As an artist, I think these both have kind of an artistic bent.
Okay.
Well, not the second one. The second one is there's, if I take any styrofoam takeout containers that are clean, I can take them to the Geauga or the Trumbull County recycling districts, and they have a vendor who makes crown molding and picture frames out of styrofoam.
Yeah, because Geauga and Trumbull there's the Stirk, Tuscarawas Recycling District, those 3 counties, and then there's like 52 of these districts throughout Ohio. So yeah, Geauga and Trumbull are.
So that's something I've been saving up for. I haven't done it yet, but I have just this big trash bag in my basement, and I just add them down there.
Waiting for the right time.
I really don't throw things away unless I know like that it was trash.
Good for you. Yeah.
The other thing that I save for, or hoard for, whatever you want to call it, it can get out of control sometimes. I try to keep it in check. But I can save 1s and 5s plastics for a duo in Akron called Tansy Recycling, and they like grind up their plastics and melt them and turn them into flower pots. And I sent them probably a year's worth of my heart pill med bottles, and they're going to turn them into beads for me, so I'm going to make a cool
Well, and that's perfect, because if those bottles are small, they probably wouldn't make it through the merge, so it is a special.
So I don't, that's kind of my long con, like I just hide it in the basement until I find someone that I know can take it.
Years ago, when we honestly started talking about this podcast, my broader idea was kind of what you're talking about, was like coming up with this like diagram of, here's what can be recycled, here's where you can take this thing but can't go in the recycling but could get reused, and just making this like network of businesses, organizations, even individuals who will take a certain specific item. So maybe one day,
I just think like there's so many cool ideas that just need to be scaled up somehow.
Yes,
and that will replace recycling eventually. A recycling district won't need to be there because there'll be enough players in it that's doing it.
We always do joke about that at the recycling district, because ultimately the way that the districts are funded is through disposal fees. So every ton of waste that goes to a landfill, there's a fee. But if you had no waste going to the landfills because you were recycling 100% of it, you wouldn't need a recycling district. So you're
a little catch-22 there.
Hopefully you have good people with the rules there that actually want to do the right thing, even though it might take away some of their funding. So.
I think we just need a lot of creative people coming up with fun ideas, and and how we scale it up to be bigger and bigger.
That's why we're going to keep the conversation going. And I think the more you talk about this stuff, I think even people who might not really have that much of an interest, there might be something that grabs their attention, So I think it's just another example of just keep talking,
and making it as convenient as possible. That's always going to have to be part of it.
I agree.
Think you have any more comments?
Yeah, anything else with our special guest, Mallory Gerstacker?
No, just thanks for having me.
You are our first special guest, so we appreciate it. And you're very special.
I loved my time in Tuscarawas County, but I'm also enjoying discovering all these new things, and hopefully I can bring ideas down to you.
Maybe we can make some interesting recycling connections between Cleveland and
if anything, I think it's more inspirational to see how some communities are doing it, because even though you're right, the scalability, I feel like you have more people and businesses and everything in Cleveland that some of these ideas can become realities, whereas down here you might hit roadblocks and there's not enough interest and whatever, but it should be inspiring.
Yeah, different challenges for different communities.
We've talked about it a few times today already, but just leading with curiosity instead of anger or frustration.
This can be a very frustrating topic, but if we try to
be curious,
bring people into the conversation with curiosity. So I agree. All right. Well, sisters, that's going to do it for this episode. So we hope that we have offered a little more clarity about. We hope that we've offered a little more clarity about how to recycle properly here in Tuscarawas County. But if you have any questions that you'd like us to address on the podcast, you can email them to WJER@WJER.com, and we'll do our very best to get answers and offer explanations to help you understand the process better, because when we know better, we do better. So I'm Hannah Hartman.
I'm Rachel Gerstacker.
I'm Mallory Gerstacker.
And we'll talk more trash on the next episode of Talkin Trash.